Everyone feared the mountain man in the cage until the widow asked to buy him with her wedding ring. In the dusty town of Redemption's Fall, folks gathered daily to stare at the monster they kept locked up like an animal. But they were all wrong about him, and only one quiet widow would see the truth hidden behind those iron bars. The summer heat made everything worse in Redemption's Fall. Dust covered the wooden buildings, and judgment hung heavier than the afternoon sun. Right in the middle of the town square sat a massive iron cage, big enough for a bear, but holding something the townspeople said was worse. They called him the Grizzly of the Ridge, though nobody knew his real name. The man inside looked like he'd been carved from the mountain itself. His hair hung in dark tangles past his shoulders, and his beard had grown wild and thick. Old scars crossed his arms and face like roads on a map. He never spoke a single word. He just sat there with empty eyes that seemed to look through people instead of at them. The bounty hunter Thorn had brought him in 3 weeks ago, claiming the mountain man had attacked travelers on the ridge. Thorn was the kind of man who smiled when others suffered. His black coat stayed clean even in all that dust, and his gun sat low on his hips. He charged folks a nickel to come look at his prize, and he loved every second of their fear and fascination. Sometimes he'd poke a stick through the bars just to make the man move, though the prisoner rarely gave him the satisfaction. Ilara watched from her shop doorway most days. She was the town's widow, a woman who'd lost her husband to fever 2 winters back. People respected her but kept their distance. Loneliness had become her constant companion. She sold fabric and thread from her small store, mending clothes when business was slow. Her brown hair stayed pinned up tight, and her simple dress never showed a wrinkle. She watched how the caged man never fought back, never growled or threatened anyone. He just existed in that terrible space, accepting whatever came his way. One afternoon changed everything. A group of boys started throwing pebbles at the cage, laughing when they bounced off the bars. Thorn stood nearby, counting his coins and encouraging them. The biggest rock hit the man's shoulder, tearing his already ruined shirt. Blood appeared, but he didn't even flinch. Instead, Ilara saw something that stopped her heart. A single tear rolled down his dirty cheek before he turned away from the crowd. That tear told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't a monster. This was a broken man. She walked straight across the square, her boots clicking on the hard ground. The crowd parted, surprised to see proper Ilara approaching the cage. Thorn tipped his hat with mock respect, that cruel smile spreading across his face. She looked him right in the eye and said the words nobody expected. She wanted to buy the mountain man. The laughter started. Immediately, men slapped their knees and women whispered behind their hands. Thorn's laugh was the loudest of all. He asked her what she could possibly offer for such a dangerous prize. Ilara raised her left hand. The simple gold band on her finger caught the sunlight. It was her wedding ring, the last piece of her husband she still wore every day. She pulled it off slowly and held it out to Thorn. The laughter stopped. The square went silent except for the wind. Thorn's eyes narrowed as he considered the offer. The ring wasn't worth much money, but the chance to humiliate both the widow and his prisoner was priceless. He snatched the ring from her palm and tossed her the cage key with a flourish. The whole town watched as Ilara unlocked the cage door. The mountain man looked at her with confusion, those empty eyes suddenly showing a spark of something. She didn't order him or threaten him. She simply said he could come with her if he wanted. He stood slowly, his huge frame unfolding from the cramped space. The crowd stepped back, but he didn't look at them. He followed Ilara like a lost dog, his chains clanking with each step. They walked together to her small house at the edge of town, leaving whispers and stares behind them. Her home was modest but clean, 2 rooms, a kitchen, and a small porch that faced the mountains. She led him inside and pointed to a chair. He sat carefully like he might break it. The tension filled the room thicker than smoke. She put water and bread on the table, then stepped back. He looked at the food, then at her, then back at the food. His hands shook as he reached for the cup. He drank slowly, savoring each drop. The bread disappeared in seconds, but he didn't grab for more, even though his eyes showed his hunger. The biggest moment came when she picked up the key to his shackles. Any smart person would have left him chained. He could kill her easily with those massive hands. But Ilara had already decided to trust what she'd seen in that tear. She unlocked the iron bands around his wrists. They fell to the floor with a heavy thud. He rubbed the raw skin gently, staring at his freed hands like he'd forgotten what they looked like. He didn't attack. He didn't run. He just sat there, finally looking her in the eye. In that look, she saw gratitude deeper than any words could express. The first night, she gave him blankets for the barn. She figured he'd need time to adjust to walls and roofs after living wild for so long. The next morning, she found her broken fence completely repaired. New posts had been carved and set in the ground. He stood by the well, washing his face with the morning's first water. She brought him breakfast, and this time he ate slower, more like a man than a starving animal. Still, he didn't speak a word. Days turned into a routine. He chopped wood without being asked. He fixed the loose boards on her porch. He cleared the weeds from her garden. She mended his torn clothes and made him new shirts from her fabric stock. She cooked extra portions and left them where he could find them. Neither pushed for conversation. They moved around each other in comfortable silence, two lonely souls finding peace in simple companionship. The townspeople treated Ilara like she'd caught whatever wildness the mountain man carried. Women crossed the street to avoid her. Men shook their heads when she came to buy supplies. The preachers suggested she needed guidance about proper Christian behavior. She ignored them all. For the first time since her husband died, she didn't feel alone. The house felt alive again with another person's presence, even a silent one. One evening, she found a wildflower on her doorstep. It was small and purple, the kind that grew high on the ridges. She knew he'd climb far to find it. She pressed it between the pages of her Bible, treasuring the simple gift. That night, she heard him trying to speak. Just sounds at first like he was remembering how voices worked. She didn't push or ask questions. She let him find his way back to words in his own time. After 3 weeks of this new life, she finally learned his name. He pointed to himself one morning and said it rough and quiet. Silas. Just that one word took enormous effort, but she smiled and repeated it back. Silas. He nodded and went back to work, but she saw his shoulders relax like a weight had lifted. A name meant he was human again, not the creature in the cage. Everything shattered when Thorne returned. He'd spent her wedding ring on whiskey and gambling, and now he wanted his prize back. He spread lies through town that Silas had stolen from local farms, that animals were going missing, that good folks weren't safe with him running free. Fear spread faster than fire. Thorne gathered a group of armed men, filling their heads with stories about what the mountain man might do to their families. They believed him because fear always wins when people don't think clearly. The mob arrived at Ilara's house just after sunset. Torches made shadows dance on the walls. Thorne stood at the front, his guns drawn and ready. He shouted for Ilara to send out the animal before someone got hurt. She stepped onto her porch, small but fierce, and told them Silas hadn't done anything wrong. The men laughed at her, calling her bewitched or worse. Thorne said he'd drag Silas out himself if she didn't move aside. That's when Silas spoke. His voice came from behind her, deep and rough from disuse but clear enough for everyone to hear. He said Thorne was the real criminal. The words poured out slowly but steadily. Silas had been a trapper, living peaceful and alone on the mountain. One day he'd witnessed Thorne and 2 other men rob a medicine wagon heading to the settlement. They'd shot the driver and left him to die. Silas had tried to help the dying man, getting blood on himself in the process. That's when Thorne found him and decided he'd make the perfect person to blame. The crowd grew restless, unsure who to believe. Silas kept talking, his voice getting stronger. He described the wagon in detail, mentioned the driver's red beard and the company name painted on the side. He knew which trail the robbery happened on and what day it occurred. One of the men in the mob suddenly spoke up. His brother had driven medicine wagons for that very company. His brother had gone missing on that exact trail, and he had a red beard. The man turned to look at Thorne with new understanding. Thorne panicked. He raised his gun toward Silas, ready to silence him forever. But the crowd had heard enough. 2 men grabbed Thorne's arms while another took his weapons. He cursed and threatened, but his words meant nothing now. The truth had finally caught up with him. The sheriff, who'd been part of the mob, officially arrested Thorne for murder and robbery. As they dragged him away, he screamed that Silas was lying, but nobody listened anymore. The town's attitude changed overnight. Men who'd paid to gawk at Silas now offered him work. Women who'd whispered about Ilara brought her pies and preserves. The preacher apologized for doubting her judgment. But Silas and Ilara didn't need the town's approval. They'd already found what they were looking for in each other. 2 people who'd been broken by life had somehow made each other whole again. Silas stayed at the homestead, no longer hiding in the barn, but sitting at the kitchen table for meals. His words came easier each day, though he still preferred silence. He told Alara about his years alone on the mountain, about the peace he'd found in solitude before Thorn destroyed it all. She told him about her husband, about the emptiness that had swallowed her after his death. They understood each other's pain without judgment. One quiet evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Silas reached into his pocket. He pulled out something small and gold. It was her wedding ring. He'd bought it back with money earned from the work he'd done around town. But instead of just handing it to her, he took her left hand gently in his rough palms. He slid the ring back onto her finger, but this time it meant something different. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was a promise for whatever future they'd build together. They never married officially or made grand declarations of love. They didn't need to. Their connection went deeper than words or ceremonies. They'd saved each other in ways that mattered more than anyone else could understand. The widow who'd been brave enough to see past the cage and the mountain man who'd been gentle enough to trust again. Together, they found a peace that neither had thought possible. What did you think of Alara's courageous choice to trust what her heart told her, instead of believing what everyone else said? Sometimes the most dangerous-looking people are actually the gentlest souls, and sometimes the real monsters wear clean clothes and charming smiles. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more tales about unexpected courage and redemption. Leave a comment below sharing what you would have done in Alara's place. Would you have been brave enough to unlock those chains?